Thank you everyone for joining us today and a big welcome. This is a special session ahead of Earth Day to give you an opportunity to hear firsthand about our work relating to the ocean and to ask our lawyers some questions. I'm Olivia of Amura. I'm a member of the fundraising team at ClientEarth, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session as we dive into the urgent threats facing our ocean and the legal solutions being used to protect it. So to set the scene, the ocean plays a vital role in sustaining life on Earth. It absorbs more carbon than all the world's rainforests combined, supports over 260,000 species, and provides livelihoods to millions of coastal communities. But as we know, it's under immense pressure from industrial fishing, drilling, and pollution, among other things. Lawyers, to start with, could you please introduce yourselves, tell us where you're based, and give an overview of what you do at ClientEarth? Perhaps we start with Katie.
Hello everyone, my name is Katie and I am a lawyer based in the London office. I work principally on plastics, so I work on legal interventions which use the power of the law to fight plastic pollution and to challenge plastic production.
Hi everyone, I'm Francesco. I'm based in our Madrid office and I'm a marine ecosystems lawyer. My work focuses on marine conservation issues, using the law to achieve meaningful and effective protection of marine protected areas and in general of marine wildlife and habitats across European waters.
Brilliant. Thank you both, and thanks for being here for this session today. So Katie, we'll start with you to help set the scene for today's discussion a bit more. Could you tell us about the state of the ocean in 2025 and what are the main threats that it's facing?
Thanks, Olivia. So as you said, the ocean is facing a number of really critical challenges this year, and we'll go into them in more detail and explain what ClientEarth is doing to tackle them. But just to kind of give you an overview of the key points, the ocean, as we know, is threatened by climate change, and that's from warming waters, ocean acidification, bleaching of coral reefs, also overfishing, and other threats to marine life from bottom trawling, also from pollution. So the area that I work on, plastic pollution being a key one, but also from chemical spills and oil spills. A few more points: the kind of lack of enforcement of rules that are meant to protect the ocean, so illegal fishing, and then finally exploitation of marine resources from oil and gas drilling. And that sounds like a lot and doesn't sound good. But I would just flag, as we have this conversation, just to keep in mind that these are really concerning issues. But on the positive side, there is so much more momentum for protecting the ocean within the last few years. Just last year, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea issued a historic advisory opinion clarifying states' obligations under international law to protect oceans from climate change. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. And then in June this year, governments, NGOs and others will come together in Nice for the third UN Ocean Conference, in which they'll discuss work for to protect the ocean and to conserve the ocean marine resources for sustainable development.
Great, thanks, Katie. Lots of food for thought there. Perhaps let's start with the threat of climate change. So could you explain how the climate and the ocean are connected? In what ways do they influence, depend on, and affect each other?
Absolutely. So we know that the planet is heating rapidly, and that's mainly due to fossil fuel emissions. What many people don't realise is that about 90% of this excess heat is in fact absorbed by the ocean. So we have ocean acidification from this increased CO2. Unfortunately, we have melting glaciers and ice sheets, changes in the salinity of the ocean from the melting ice, disruption of ocean currents, which can then affect weather patterns, marine heat waves, which can cause mass coral bleaching events, and deoxygenation as warmer water holds less oxygen. And what impact does that cause? So we see a loss of habitats, loss of ecosystems, and displacement of marine species due to this increasingly acidic water. Also, the effects of sea rises on coastal communities in small island states, which can then, face threat to people's homes and livelihoods, ancestral lands. And also really sadly kind of dead zones within the ocean from this oxygen loss, where, these areas have just become uninhabitable for marine life. And so we know that the ocean is critical to maintaining our climate. But really, I think most people don't understand how critical it is, because the ocean can only absorb a finite amount of CO2 and heat, and the more it absorbs, the less it is able to keep doing so. So as we go further down this path of damaging the ocean, we are essentially kind of removing our ability to keep mitigating our existing CO2. There's also the fact that ocean currents are vital in regulating global climate patterns. And so when this is disrupted, it affects the kind of global climate regulation and causes more extreme weather events. Couple more things, and then I'll speak about something a bit more hopeful. So ocean ecosystems like mangroves and seagrasses are essential in mitigating the effects of climate change on coastal communities, like the extreme weather events and the sea level rises. But again, changes in the ocean that I've described are kind of damaging this kind of barrier that we have. So all of that is to say that to minimize and mitigate the effects of climate change, it's absolutely vital that we protect and restore the ocean. It's our sort of last line of defense. And when you hear about how we're harming the ocean, it's really easy to feel like the situation is just awful and there's nothing we can do to change it. But I would just say that, there's loads of people all around the world working to protect the ocean from climate change, including some of my fellow lawyers here at ClientEarth. There's also a really amazing group of small island states and communities, which are perhaps the most vulnerable to climate change and historically the least responsible, who are taking these issues to the highest courts and tribunals. So I mentioned that the opinion from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which stated last year that countries have a legal obligation to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to protect the ocean. So that opinion was requested by a group of small island states. And small island states have also laid behind an amazing case where ClientEarth supported Torres Strait Islanders to win historic legal action against Australia for climate-induced damages to ancestral lands as a result of sea level rise. And really, I could go on and on about the importance of these wins and the importance of international law for protecting the sea and protecting climate change. But, I can't list them all, but I'll just say that really we have a huge number of cases that are seeking to hold governments and businesses to account for climate change and to drive positive action, and including to protect the ocean.
Great, thank you, Katie. That's some really helpful context for us to start with. So turning to you, Francesco, as Katie mentioned, much of the planet's and the ocean's unprecedented warming is driven by fossil fuel emissions, with oil and gas being major contributors. So beyond their massive climate impact, could you please explain how these industries directly threaten ocean health?
Sure. I will take you through how oil and gas basically operations harm the ocean at every stage of the process, from exploration right through to extraction. Let's start with exploration. Exploration is essentially the process of searching for oil and gas deposits under the seabed, but it's far from harmless. Essentially, it involves extremely invasive activities like exploratory drilling and seismic surveys, which already start to damage the marine environment before any oil and gas is even extracted. For example, these activities can seriously disrupt the seabed, damaging basically sensitive habitats such as cold water corals or deep sea sponge communities. These ecosystems are incredibly fragile, and they take decades, if not longer, to recover from such impacts. There's also the constant risk of accidental oil spills during drilling. Even during exploration phases, spills can contaminate vast ocean areas, poisoning marine life. And then there's the issue of noise pollution, which is incredible. Seismic surveys use air guns that produce extremely loud blasts of sound underwater. These surveys, along with noise from vessels and machinery, create a hostile environment for marine mammals like whales and dolphins. These animals depend heavily on sound to navigate, communicate, and find food. Disrupting these soundscapes can cause disorientation, stress, and even strandings. Now we can also move to extraction, the phase where oil and gas is actually brought up from beneath the seabed. Extraction requires large-scale infrastructures, oil rigs, pipelines, wells, and an increase in ship traffic, all of which introduce a wide range of pollutants into the marine environment. We're talking about chemical discharges, microplastics, heavy metals like mercury, for example, all harmful substances that disrupt marine ecosystems and biodiversity. The risks of major oil spills all increase at this stage, with pollution spreading over enormous distances, sometimes crossing international waters and affecting ecosystems and coastal communities far from the original spill site. Building these infrastructures also causes physical destruction of vital habitats like seagrass beds, for example, coral reefs and kelp forests, ecosystems that are essential for carbon storage and marine biodiversity. And it's not just about large spills or visible damage. During extractions, for instance, there is the release of microplastics, which is a lesser known but extremely concerning issue. These tiny particles of plastics have been found, for example, in the lungs of fish and are part of the wider global plastic crisis. Additionally, wastewater contaminated with oil and chemicals is often a byproduct of extraction processes. Even with regulations, leaks and discharges do happen, seeping harmful substances into the ocean. Finally, once the infrastructure is in place, it continues to impact the marine environment until its dismantling. These structures become obstacles in the ocean, disrupting migratory routes for species like whales and dolphins and affecting the natural behaviors of countless marine creatures.
Thank you, Francesco. So obviously a lot of that's incredibly alarming and there's a lot of destruction happening. So it would be really great if you could tell us what ClientEarth is doing to address oil and gas exploration and extraction in the ocean.
Of course, at ClientEarth, we're dedicated to protect the ocean from the harmful impacts of oil and gas exploration and exploitation. We have a whole line of work of our strategy addressing these impacts. Our recent victory in Italy is a great example of our efforts on this are making a real difference. Picture, for example, the vibrant ecosystem of Italy's Po Delta, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a complex mosaic of wetlands, lagoons, and coastal communities that support hundreds of species of birds, as well as marine mammals and several other endangered species. Offshore habitats, including marine protected areas of the Po Delta, provide essential feeding and breeding grounds for dolphins and other marine life. These environments act as sanctuaries, as crucial ecological corridors linking coastal and marine biodiversity, and their health is directly threatened by industrial activities like offshore drilling. In this specific case, the Italian government had approved drilling for gas here, giving an Australian company permission to build a major gas platform known as the Teodorico project, using the name of an emperor might give a lead on the magnitude of this project. In 2021, we joined forces with Italian NGOs, Legambiente, LIPU, BirdLife Italy, WWF Italy, and Greenpeace Italy to challenge the Italian government. What we argued basically was that the Italian state had failed to assess, prior to authorizing the project, the devastating impacts on the adjacent marine protected areas, a sanctuary for countless species. We stressed that the developers and the Italian authorities should have conducted a rigorous and science-based assessment of environmental impacts, ensuring compliance with EU nature protection laws before granting any approval, which was not the case. In a landmark decision, our collective voice was heard. The court, in fact, in November 2024, after more than 3 years of litigation, ruled in our favor and put a stop to this project, preventing the construction of the gas platform and safeguarding the Po Delta's precious ecosystems and the livelihood of these of its marine inhabitants. But our work doesn't stop here. We also have a major active case in Greece. In Greece, in fact, we are petitioning the European Commission to address the government's approval of oil and gas exploration and exploitation in areas rich in marine biodiversity, especially in the Hellenic Trench, which is a global hotspot for biodiversity. In fact, despite Greece's commitments to expand marine protected areas there, at the same time, the Greek state continues to allow fossil fuel drilling activities, putting basically these vital ecosystems at risk. And we are determined to hold the Greek state accountable and ensure that protected means protected. While on the one hand, they want to expand marine protected areas, on the other, they continue authorizing these activities in violation of EU law. Scientific evidence supports our cause. Harmful practices like seismic whales, drilling, and increased vessel activity threaten fragile ecosystems. We are urging, therefore, the European Commission to reassess the legal and scientific evidence to protect marine biodiversity and ensure that EU law, which is there, is respected. These legal victories and our ongoing efforts are crucial in the fight to protect our ocean. By challenging harmful projects and advocating for stronger protections, we are making a positive impact on marine biodiversity and combating, as we said before, climate change.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francesco, for giving us an insight into some of your work. And, you know, I'll take a deep breath for a second because all of these facts are obviously very concerning. So to touch on another topic that we've mentioned already, Katie, as our plastics expert, could you give us a sense of the scale of the plastic pollution problem and explain how plastic is impacting ocean health?
Of course, thanks, Olivia. So plastic in the ocean is, of course, a monumental problem. Plastic makes up a significant portion of marine litter. There are estimates that more than 8 million tons of plastic enter the oceans every year. There's also estimates that there'll be more plastic by weight than fish in the ocean by 2050. And in fact, some people also think that's an underestimate of just kind of how much plastic really is going into the ocean every year and will continue to do so. So, and as Francesco mentioned, microplastics are everywhere in the ocean. So, you know, they've even been found at the deepest parts, such as the Mariana Trench. And so let's just talk through some of the impacts of plastic. So firstly, how is it impacting marine ecosystems? So from entanglement and ingestion by marine species to the disruption of food chains, plastic pollution absolutely wreaks havoc on marine life. You know, there are more than 100 species of birds threatened because of plastics, because they mistake it for food, eat it, feel full, and then starve. In fact, when I started working on this, I was really struck by this quote from David Attenborough from an interview, I think, in 2017. So, you know, feels like we should have learned from that. But he gave this quote in an interview. He said, describing what he'd seen about plastics in the ocean, saying, "We've seen albatrosses come back with their belly full of food for their young and nothing in it. The albatross parent has been away for 3 weeks gathering stuff for her young, and all they have collected, what comes out? What did she give her chick? You think it's going to be squid, but it's plastic, and the chick is going to starve and die as a result." Yeah, pretty awful. So there are lots of other impacts on marine ecosystems. So plastic ingestion weakens some of the immune systems of species like oysters, and that can make them more vulnerable to disease and predators. There's also evidence that marine mammals like dolphins and whales suffer from endocrine disruption due to plastic-related chemicals, which then impacts their behavior and reproduction. Plastic pollution is also impacting the ocean's ability to sequester and store carbon, which, as we discussed earlier, is really critical to the fight against climate change, given that the ocean is our largest carbon sink. So Around 50% of the oxygen that we consume comes from the ocean, and most of that comes from algae that we can't see. This algae is present on the surface of the ocean, which, along with the kelp forests and the seagrass meadows that I mentioned, capture carbon from the atmosphere and releases oxygen. However, the tiny, tiny microplastics and nanoplastics in the ocean interfere with the algae and the plankton's ability to undertake that process to sequester the carbon dioxide and release oxygen. And then finally, plastic pollution floating in the ocean, when exposed to sunlight, then actually can release the carbon back into the atmosphere. So yeah, not great. There is one more point I'll mention if we can all take it, which is that whales, in fact, play a really vital role in carbon sequestration in the ocean, by storing kind of 30 tons of carbon during their lifetime. And then when these whales die, they sink, and that can actually trap that carbon for centuries. However, there's some really concerning signs that plastic debris in the ocean can in fact cause entanglement, and when ingested by the whales can lead to problems such as sort of illnesses and other issues that then can lead whales to die sooner than they should, then causing them to capture less carbon. So on the whole, just a really toxic mix of problems.
Thank you, Katie. And yeah, I'm constantly struck in this job about the amount of work that there is to do. But thankfully, at ClientEarth, we're doing various things to help tackle some of these problems. So Katie, it'd be great if you could tell us about some of the work that you and your colleagues are doing on the plastic crisis.
Absolutely. So we are trying to do our best to close the tap of plastic pollution entering our ocean, and in general by reducing unnecessary single-use plastic and restricting plastic to its most essential applications in the most critical sectors, for example, healthcare. To this end, we've launched several cases against companies to force them to produce less plastic. So just in the last few years, we have sued Danone for failing to comply with its due diligence obligations in relation to its plastic footprint. We've launched a big greenwashing action against companies Coca-Cola, Danone, and Nestle over their false or misleading recycling claims. And this is part of these claims are often part of kind of a decades-long campaign by fast-moving consumer goods companies and other companies that say to individuals, it's your responsibility to recycle, rather than to take onus for the fact that these companies are putting these highly polluting products on the market. So our legal action challenges these misleading 100% recyclable and 100% recycled claims and other green claims made on plastic water bottles to say that plastic isn't green, these products aren't going to be or will not be recycled, and may not be made of recycled content. And that's an ongoing complaint to the European Consumer Protection Corporation Network about these misleading green claims. Also last year, we investigated soft plastic recycling schemes in the UK, where consumers are encouraged to take back their soft plastic to supermarkets to recycle. This involved attaching trackers. We worked with an NGO to attach trackers to the plastic to see where it ended up. And unfortunately, the significant majority of the plastic wasn't being recycled, but was in fact being incinerated. And as a part of that project, we put companies on notice, drafting a briefing that said that these companies are breaching consumer protection law through these misleading recycling claims. We've also lobbied for stronger laws and international agreements that tackle unnecessary plastic production pollution. For example, some of my excellent colleagues in Brussels and London have been working on the packaging and packaging waste regulation, and also other regulation targeting microplastics to ensure that there is a ban, for example, on intentionally added microplastics in cosmetic products. We've also, I think this is one of the cases I'm most excited about, trying to stop the expansion of plastic production around the world. And to that end, we're going against INEOS's plan to build a multi-billion euro plastics facility in the port of Antwerp, Belgium. And the great thing is that we're scoring victories because the project has already been reduced to half its planned size and has been delayed several times. And I would also just like to plug that we are in fact researching 3 more cases as we continue to plan to ramp up our actions against the biggest plastic polluters. And if you'd like to support our work, you can absolutely do so today as part of our Earth Day campaign, so we can take on even more of these crucial actions.
Wonderful, thank you, Katie. And yeah, I think our plastics work and the work that you and your colleagues are doing really shows how ClientEarth uses the full life cycle of the law and, you know, wants to stop excessive production and then dealing with these misleading recycling claims as well. So it's really great to hear about. Thank you. So I'll hand back over to Francesco for the next question. So as we've outlined so far, it's clear that plastic pollution is a major threat to ocean life and carbon storage, but there are other human-induced threats facing our ocean as well. So Francesco, if you could speak to us about how destructive fishing practices are threatening the ocean, could you explain what bottom trawling is and why it's so harmful?
Absolutely. Thank you, Olivia, for this question. Bottom trawling is arguably the most distracting fishing method in use today. As the name suggests, bottom trawling consists in dragging heavy nets across the seafloor to catch species that live on the seabed or near the bottom, like cod, egg, shrimp, and octopus. But the problem is this technique, on the one hand, is completely non-selective, and on the other, it destroys whatever it comes across. As the nets are dragged across the seabed, they catch everything in their path. Entire habitats like seagrass meadows and coral reefs are destroyed in the process. These are sensitive and crucial ecosystems, and the damage done by trawling can take centuries to recover, if at all. Another major issue, as I was saying, is bycatch. Bottom trawling has an incredibly high bycatch rate, around 60%. That means more than half of what is caught is unintended, is not the target species. This includes endangered animals like sea turtles, dolphins, and sharks, for example, many of which are killed or seriously injured before being discarded back into the ocean. But the damage doesn't stop here. Bottom trawling, in addition to all of this, has a massive climate impact. In fact, the carbon emissions from bottom trawling are estimated to be equivalent to around 40% of the annual emissions of the entire US transportation sector. And because trawling destroys delicate seafloor ecosystems, it also undermines the ocean's ability to naturally store carbon, like seagrass meadows, for example. This is something that is absolutely vital in the fight against climate change. By damaging, in fact, these essential ecosystems, bottom trawling not only drives the decline of marine biodiversity, but it also directly hinders our efforts to mitigate climate change, as it acts against the biggest and most powerful marine carbon storage system. Now, just to give you a sense of the practice of bottom trawling, of the scale of this practice, bottom trawling accounts for a quarter of the global fishing catch and makes up 32% of the total catch in the European Union. Shockingly, 8 of the top 10 countries emitting carbon from bottom trawling, in fact, are in Europe. Given how destructive these practices, we firmly believe that it has no place in marine protected areas that are supposed to safeguard marine life from harmful activities. But the reality on the water tells us different stories. Many MPAs in Europe remain open to bottom trawling, and you can realize how contradictory this is. I mean, on the one hand, we have an area that's supposed to be protected, and on the other, this destructive practice it's allowed within its borders. In fact, even though there are rules at the EU level designed to protect marine protected areas, they're often ignored or poorly enforced. How even like it's incredible that we're talking about like rules to actually protect marine protected areas. But a recent study, for example, in Europe showed that over 80% of Europeans' marine protected areas are currently ineffective. They remain on paper. It's the phenomenon called of paper parks. because they provide only marginal protection against destructive industrial activities, like, for example, bottom trawling.
Great, thank you, Francesco. So, you've outlined there how much of a problem bottom trawling is. It would be great to hear about what sustainable alternatives exist to bottom trawling, and also what ClientEarth is doing to prevent bottom trawling in these essential marine protected areas that you spoke about.
Sure. Well, it is possible to fish in a way that doesn't devastate marine ecosystems. It's been done for thousands of years before us. For example, we can use fishing gear that's more selective and less invasive, targeting only the species that we want to catch actually, and leaving the rest of marine life undisturbed. Another great alternative is adopting small-scale artisanal fishing techniques, which are methods much better placed at reducing bycatch, and also they produce far fewer emissions. More importantly, also, they don't just benefit the ocean, they also support local fishing communities, preserving livelihoods while preserving marine biodiversity. But it's not only about better fishing gear or techniques. We also actually need, as I was saying before, to properly enforce the rules that already exist to protect marine protected areas. This is fun and sad at the same time. The European Commission must step up and start taking action against countries that ignore these rules. Because when MPAs are effectively managed and actually protected, not only on paper, that can really be a game changer. Marine protected areas help restore fish populations. In fact, they could boost seafood catch by up to 8 million tons globally. That's a huge contribution. Not just for marine life, but also for global food securities we are so much talking about lately, especially. By protecting these vital areas, we give our ocean the chance to stay vibrant, abundant, and full of life. Crucially, governments need to go further and ban, therefore, bottom trawling in marine protected areas altogether. There's progress, actually. Just last April, Greece announced a ban on bottom trawling in all MPAs by 2030. Fantastic news, but we say that Greece, like another things, is not that fantastic. Now we need bold action from other countries to follow Greece leads on this. With the upcoming UN Ocean Conference, states have a golden opportunity to step up. And this is exactly where ClientEarth and our partners come in. Together, we are challenging actually governments that are failing to protect their marine protected areas from bottom trawling. Right now, we have 3 ongoing litigation cases. One against the French government for allowing bottom trawling in the Mediterranean Sea protected areas together with Bloom. Another action against the Spanish government this time for allowing bottom trawling both in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean protected areas, this time with Oceania. And the third action against the Dutch government for allowing bottom trawling in the Dogger Bank, which is one of Europe's most important marine areas across Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK. This action is with Dogger Lab Foundation, Blue Marine Foundation, and Ark Rewilding. These areas host incredibly vulnerable habitats. They simply cannot be, it's evident, bulldozed by industrial fishing, because protected must mean protected. Otherwise, what we're talking about.
Great, thank you, Francesco. So we're coming to the end of the session. Katie, to wrap us up before we go to a quick Q&A, what role can our supporters play in supporting your work and the Only the Ocean campaign this Earth Day?
Thank you. That is a great question. So people can support us in a few different ways. Firstly, by following us on social media. You can follow us, you can follow the hashtag Only the Ocean campaign, and your engagement really helps us to amplify our message and to reach more people. If you're based in the UK, you can also take action by writing to your MP about destructive fishing using the link in the chat to get started. Your voice matters, and by reaching out to your MP, you can advocate for stronger marine conservation policies. I'd also encourage you to explore Ocean Hub. So, Pardon the pun, but you can dive deeper into our work by visiting our hub, where you can find detailed information about what we're doing to protect our ocean, our priorities, and our cases. And lastly, if you are able, please consider making a donation. Every bit counts, and we really appreciate your support. For everything that you can do today, we'll be posting links in the chat, so keep an eye out for how you can help us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. So we've got a few minutes for Q&A. Thank you to everyone for submitting your questions. As we're with you now, Katie, perhaps I'll hand to you first if there was anything that stood out that you'd like to answer.
Sure, absolutely. I saw a really interesting question in the chat, which I ask myself often, which is, given the extent of the plastic crisis, how does ClientEarth choose which cases to pursue when addressing this question? And this question was anonymous. So this is a really good question, because how on earth do you narrow down when the problems are everywhere and there are so many companies that are responsible? We need action from governments, we need just action across the board. And I think when we plan our plastics cases, we start by thinking, where can we have the most strategic impact? And a lot of the time that has led us to concentrate, for example, on plastic packaging, so food and drink packaging, because that is one of the biggest sources of litter, also one of the biggest kind of sources of litter in the ocean. So we think about, you know, what is the problem that we're trying to address and where? And we also think about what is the unique contribution that we can make as an NGO staffed by mostly kind of lawyers, specialist policy experts, technical experts. So, you know, there are so many amazing organizations out there, and others might approach a problem from a campaign perspective. And some issues might be more amenable to suing a company or a government, but others might be better for a campaign, for example. So we look at, you know, what's our unique contribution as an NGO, using our legal skills. So for me, that means looking at, okay, how easy is it to litigate in the UK versus Europe? And what are the different legal frameworks that I can rely upon to make arguments about plastic pollution? So in fact, this is my favorite part of my job, because I can be really creative and sort of look at the different countries out there and the different problems and think, okay, well, how would this case work in that country? And what impact could that case have? But, you know, we're absolutely collaborative by nature. So we are always working with partners and looking at what our partners are doing. So if, for example, there is another NGO which is bringing a case in another country, then it may be that we don't need to do that case because there are other amazing organizations doing it. So really, it's a real complex kind of matrix of factors that we have to consider. But it's one of my favorite parts of my job, is trying to kind of machinate all of that together and then pick the best case.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. I think we've got time for one more question. Perhaps if Francesco, there was one. There have been some really great questions in the chat, so apologies that we've only got time for one more.
Yeah, actually, the questions were really great, and I might pick up one for legal nerds that I like very, very much, and it's about a topic that, I mean, we could spend hours talking about. Razika asked about the legal obligation on states to protect the oceans, and wondering like if there are any compliance mechanisms outlined, like for example, in the ITLOS advisory opinion, states they say disregard international law regularly. How can that be prevented in this case? It is true that states do disregard international law, and actually at international level, the compliance mechanisms are often a bit ineffective, also because they rely on the willingness of states, and are not open to the whole like public, and they're very restrictive in terms of access. However, what I think is really important is that these advisory opinions trace what states actually have to do to comply with international law. But international law doesn't really remain at the international level, because it's embedded in national systems as well. We have several layers of regulation. So international law can also be used in litigation, for example, at national levels, of course, like depending on the specificities of national systems, but there is the opportunity to use it to make states accountable to comply with their obligations that they do stem from the international legal orders, but reflect onto their day-to-day duties. And I think that's very important, and that's why we do litigate, especially on marine protection against states, and then links actually to another question that I read. We litigate against states because states have obligations and state must comply with their obligations. So this is why we act in making sure that these obligations, which outline very clear duties as to the protection of the marine environment, are properly enforced. We can litigate against companies, but we do litigate now, for example, against states, because states need to make sure that companies comply. So it comes from a state duty in this case.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francesco. And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our session today. I know that we could continue to talk about this for a very, very long time. A huge thank you to Katie and Francesco for being here today, for sharing your valuable insights so deeply and candidly. Thank you as well to our wonderful interpreters for allowing us to deliver this session in Spanish and German. And a huge thank you to our colleague Lucy for all of her work in organising today's webinar. And finally, thank you to everybody who joined the call today, who popped a question in the Q&A, who left a comment. Your time and support really does mean everything. And, you know, with my fundraising hat on, the work that we do is only possible because of people like you that support ClientEarth and what we're trying to achieve, and for standing with us to drive climate change and nature action in a positive way. We really do appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with events@clientearth.org. And there is endless amounts of information on our website about anything you've heard today. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.